Eala just surrendered $1 million, and somehow that decision transformed her into something beyond a champion. She handed away every single peso, every dollar, every digit of her winnings, and in return received something no prize envelope could ever hold. What happens when an athlete walks away from generational wealth, not because she stumbled, not because she failed, but because something greater pulled at her soul? This is not simply a story about money. This is the moment a young woman from Manila decided that legacy matters infinitely more than fortune, and the world, it answered back in ways nobody anticipated. There are athletes who compete for themselves. Then there exist those rare, luminous souls who carry an entire people on their shoulders each time they step onto a court. Alexandra Eala belongs to that second, rarer category, and she has known this weight since childhood. Born in Manila on May 23, 2005, she absorbed two realities simultaneously: the glamour of professional tennis, as nurtured by the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, and the brutal unpredictability of life in a developing archipelago, perpetually vulnerable to nature's wrath. These two worlds did not simply coexist inside her, they collided, fused, and eventually forged someone the tennis universe had never quite encountered before. Her ascent was nothing short of electrifying: junior Grand Slam titles, WTA victories that shattered Philippine records. She became the highest-ranked Filipino woman in tennis history, a distinction that arrived not through luck or sponsorship engineering, but through relentless, unglamorous dedication, pre-dawn court sessions, grueling clay court drills, sacrificing adolescence for excellence. But excellence in tennis often arrives packaged with isolation. You are only as relevant as your last result. The circuit is merciless, the schedule suffocating, and the loneliness between tournaments can hollow out even the strongest competitors. Eala navigated all of it with a composure that belied her age, smiling for press conferences, meticulous in preparation, never allowing opponents to glimpse vulnerability. What her opponents could not see, however, is what she watched on her phone late at night in hotel rooms across Europe and North America: footage of submerged provinces, aerial footage of destroyed villages, families clinging to rooftops, children being airlifted from flooded schools. The Philippines, her home, was drowning again. Tropical cyclones had intensified beyond historical precedent. Entire municipalities along Luzon's eastern corridor were swallowed by floodwaters that refused to recede. Thousands displaced, crops annihilated, livelihoods erased overnight. Government relief stretched dangerously thin against the sheer magnitude of destruction. Eala watched this unfold from a luxury apartment in Madrid, and something shifted inside her that no coaching session could address, that no motivational speech could resolve. She began quietly making calls to her family, to organizations she trusted, to people embedded within disaster response networks across the archipelago. She was not preparing a press release. She was not choreographing a charitable moment for social media consumption. She was preparing a decision. The tournament itself was already legendary before Eala even lifted the trophy. Competing against a draw that featured 3 former Grand Slam finalists and 2 reigning top 10 competitors, she executed tennis that analysts described as tactically flawless, a phrase rarely applied to any player under 25. Her serve percentage held above 72% through 5 consecutive matches. Her backhand down the line, arguably the most refined stroke in her arsenal, kept opponents pinned and predictable. She moved with an economy of motion that exhausted rivals while preserving her own energy across long, grinding baseline exchanges. The final was won in straight sets, dominant, decisive, undeniable. When the trophy ceremony concluded and the check presenter stepped forward, the gleaming presentation board bearing $1 million, The crowd roared. Social media immediately exploded. Filipino fans across every time zone erupted into collective celebration. Hashtags surged. News anchors began preparing segments. Eala smiled graciously, accepted the board, and posed for photographs. She thanked her coaches, her family, her support team with genuine warmth. And then, in the press conference that followed, the moment everything pivoted, a journalist asked a routine question about her plans for the winnings. The room expected something typical, a comment about future investments, perhaps, training facilities, maybe a lighthearted remark about a celebration dinner. Instead, Eala paused. Not a dramatic pause designed for effect, a quiet, considered pause, the kind that signals someone choosing words with extraordinary care because the words actually matter. "I've been watching what's happening at home," she said, her voice steady, unhurried. "The floods, the families. I cannot look at this check and pretend those images aren't in my mind." Another pause. "I'm giving it, all of it, to the relief efforts." The room processed this slowly. Journalists glanced at one another. Someone asked her to repeat herself. She did, without hesitation. Every dollar. The full $1,000,000. And here is what nobody fully understood yet. This wasn't impulsive. This was months in the making. Within 45 minutes of that press conference clip circulating online, Alex Eala's name was trending across 17 countries simultaneously. The initial wave of reaction was overwhelming and not uniformly celebratory. Filipino communities across social media became instantaneously divided. One faction erupted with uncontainable pride. "She is the Philippines," one viral post declared, accumulating millions of interactions within hours. Fan pages flooded with prayers, tributes, artwork depicting Eala alongside Philippine flags, messages from provincial mayors whose municipalities were among those ravaged by the floods. The images of relief workers receiving coordination calls, crediting Eala's donation as transformative, spread with astonishing velocity. Organizations confirmed that the funds would translate directly into emergency food packages, temporary shelter construction, and medical supplies reaching communities inaccessible through standard government channels. But another contingent, louder than anticipated, raised uncomfortable challenges. "She earned that money," argued one widely shared commentary thread. "Why should any athlete feel obligated to surrender personal income? This normalizes exploitation of successful people from developing nations." The argument gathered traction among certain sports economists and cultural commentators who worried about the precedent being established that Filipino athletes specifically would face mounting societal pressure to perform philanthropy as prerequisite for public approval. Others questioned the logistics. Where precisely were the funds directed? Through which organizations? With what accountability mechanisms? Eala's team responded methodically, releasing a detailed breakdown of partnered relief organizations, projected impact assessments, and independent oversight commitments. The transparency was deliberate, comprehensive, pre-prepared. Further evidence that this decision had been calculated, not impulsive. Sports journalists who had covered her for years noted something significant in that preparation. This was not a young woman overwhelmed by guilt into generosity. This was an athlete who had made a considered ethical commitment and executed it with the same precision she applied to match preparation. Still, the question that dominated commentary across every platform was Nike's silence. Her primary endorsement partner had said absolutely nothing, publicly, for nearly 12 hours. 12 hours that felt to her supporters like abandonment. Inside Nike's global sports marketing division, the conversations were urgent. Sources familiar with the deliberations described an internal tension between two schools of thought. One perspective argued caution that publicly endorsing an athlete's decision to donate prize winnings created contractual and precedential complications. Sponsors invest in performance, in visibility, in brand alignment. An athlete redistributing income signals financial unpredictability to commercial partners. The opposing perspective, which ultimately prevailed, recognized something far more commercially potent than conventional sponsorship calculus. Alex Eala, in a single press conference, had achieved what no advertising campaign could manufacture: authentic, global, emotional resonance. She had not hired a publicist to construct a charitable narrative. She had simply acted from conviction and allowed the world to witness it. 12 hours after the announcement, Nike released a statement that immediately became one of the most discussed corporate communications in recent sports history. They were not simply maintaining Eala's existing contract, the statement confirmed. They were doubling it. The financial details were not disclosed publicly, but sports industry analysts estimated the revised agreement represented one of the most substantial endorsement commitments Nike had extended to any Southeast Asian athlete, male or female, in the organization's history. The statement's language was notably specific. Nike cited Eala's embodiment of authentic purpose and her demonstration that athletic achievement and human responsibility need not compete. They could, in fact, amplify one another. Social media, which had spent 12 hours questioning corporate silence, reversed direction with equal ferocity. Eala's name trended again, but now with different energy. Something quieter, more profound. Because what had just unfolded was not simply a heartwarming story. It was evidence that authenticity, executed without calculation for personal benefit, could alter the commercial architecture of professional sports. And somewhere in the Philippines, relief workers were already unloading supplies. Numbers matter. Specificity matters. Because when someone surrenders $1 million, the impact deserves to be witnessed concretely, not abstractly celebrated. The relief operation, coordinated through Eala's donation, reached 17 severely affected municipalities across 3 provinces. Emergency food assistance, rice, canned goods, clean water filtration supplies, reached approximately 8,400 displaced families within the initial deployment phase. Temporary shelter materials were distributed to communities where floodwaters had structurally compromised permanent housing. Medical brigades, physicians, nurses, and community health workers were funded for 6 weeks of sustained deployment in areas where healthcare infrastructure had been temporarily destroyed. Agricultural recovery grants reached farmers whose rice fields and fishing vessels had been destroyed, providing seed capital for rebuilt livelihoods rather than merely emergency subsistence. These were not abstractions. These were families who ate because she decided to act. Children who slept under intact roofs because she chose legacy over accumulation. In a provincial elementary school in northern Luzon, a building whose classrooms had been submerged, teachers hung a photograph of Eala alongside a handwritten message from students. She gave so we could return to our desks. When that photograph surfaced online, it did not trend, it did not generate viral metrics. Instead, it circulated quietly, person to person, message to message, through networks of ordinary people who simply wanted to share something that felt genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. Meanwhile, Eala returned to practice. No extended media tour, no televised charity galas, no partnership announcements beyond the Nike confirmation she had not sought but graciously acknowledged. She simply resumed training for the next tournament. That restraint, the absence of self-promotional machinery around an act of extraordinary generosity, generated its own profound commentary. Athletes and public figures who leverage philanthropy for brand construction are visible everywhere. What made Eala distinctive was precisely what she declined to do with the attention. She treated the donation as obligation, not opportunity. Here is where the narrative becomes genuinely complicated, and where comfortable celebration must give way to honest examination. Alex Ayala's choice was extraordinary, inspirational beyond reasonable dispute. The direct, measurable impact on thousands of lives deserves acknowledgement that goes beyond #enthusiasm. But she's 20 years old. She's an athlete whose earning window, the compressed, physically demanding years during which professional tennis generates significant income, is finite. Prize money does not accumulate across a career linearly. Bodies sustain injuries, rankings fluctuate, the commercial landscape shifts. $1 million at 20 represents a financial foundation that could transform not only her life, but her family's economic security across generations. By surrendering it entirely, she made a profound statement. She also made a sacrifice that carries genuine personal cost, and that cost deserves acknowledgement alongside the celebration. There is a broader pressure that her act now places, whether she intended this or not, on other Filipino athletes, on other Southeast Asian competitors who reach financial summits. A standard has been established, not legally, not contractually, but culturally. The expectation that success carries mandatory redistribution. This expectation applied selectively to athletes from developing nations, while their Western counterparts face no equivalent cultural scrutiny, represents a form of inequity disguised as virtue. These are not comfortable observations. They exist alongside genuine admiration for what she chose. Both truths occupy the same space. What Eala's story ultimately illuminates is something more nuanced than simple heroism. It reveals the complex intersection of individual agency, national identity, commercial power, and human compassion, all converging in the life of a 20-year-old holding $1 million check in a world that desperately needs hope. She made her choice with clarity and executed it without fanfare. Whether that standard should define the obligations of every athlete who follows her, that question belongs to all of us, not only to her. What do you believe? Should athletes from developing nations carry this burden of expectation, or does holding them to that standard represent its own injustice? Drop your perspective in the comments. This conversation deserves your voice. If you watched this entire journey, from that press conference pause to the relief workers to Nike's reversal to the children returning to their desks, then you already understand something profound. The most powerful currency a person possesses is never printed on any check. Alex Eala proved that, publicly, permanently. Subscribe, because stories this authentic, this complicated, this genuinely human deserve to be found. A 20-year-old surrendered a fortune and received something no amount could purchase, a legacy larger than any trophy. Alex Ayala's decision revealed that the true measure of a champion extends far beyond any court. What she built in that single act will outlast every ranking, every endorsement, every record she will ever achieve. That is what greatness actually looks like. Subscribe for more stories that remind you why sport matters beyond the scoreboard.